Chapter 3, Ancient Egypt and Nubia. Water, as you know, will always flow downhill, whether the downhill direction is to the east, to the west, to the north, or to the south. Water will flow that way. Study the map and then carry out a few activities to understand the difference between up and down and north and south. Locate the Nile River with your finger on this map and trace its route. And there is the Nile. In what direction does the Nile River flow? And how do you know this? Pause for a minute or two, however long you need, and think about it. Now find the two areas labeled Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Is Lower Egypt north or south of Upper Egypt? Which area is upriver from the other? In which region is the land higher? How do you know this? Once again, pause the video, think about it, and then we will come to our conclusion. All right, we're back. So what is your conclusion? What did you come to? Remember, water always flows downhill. Okay? Is downhill always south? Well, south moves in this direction, right? It looks like it goes down, but that's not always the case. The Nile, considering this is Upper Egypt and this is Lower Egypt, flows north, because north in this case is going downhill. And as we'll see in this section, that's extremely important that the Nile flows, once again, north. Downhill is going north, because the Nile River will bring silt with it to the Lower Egyptian region, all right, which will bring great fertile lands for farming in Lower Egypt, and therefore help civilization grow and expand in Lower Egypt, close to the Mediterranean Sea and the Sinai Peninsula. Chapter 3, Section 1, The Geography of the Nile. Perhaps you live near a river, lake, or ocean. If so, then you know that bodies of water affect your environment. You enjoy them for recreation, or perhaps your family depends on them for a living. Think of several ways nearby water can affect the way people live. One example is here of the Ramapo River affecting our Oakland community from a few years ago. Questions to think about and explore as we go through our section. 1. How does the geography of the Nile River change as it runs from its sources to the delta? 2. How did the Nile support human life in ancient times? Key terms that will be defined for you through the Google Classroom for you to examine, and we'll see throughout the section, are cataract, delta, and silt. Key people and places to keep an ear out for: Herodotus, Lower Nubia, Upper Egypt, and Lower Egypt. Egypt is the gift of the Nile, wrote the Greek historian Herodotus. He explored Egypt in the 400s BC. He saw the life-giving waters of its great river. He traveled upriver until he was stopped by churning rapids of white water. Unable to get past the rapids, he turned back. He never found the source of the river. Herodotus wrote down his observations of Egypt and other lands. They still make interesting reading today. Despite his failure to locate the source of the Nile, Herodotus had learned a basic truth: there would be no Egypt without the Nile. The course of the Nile. The Nile is the world's longest river. It flows north from its sources in Central Africa to the Mediterranean Sea for more than 4,000 miles. The Nile has two main sources: the Blue Nile, rises in the highlands of the present-day country of Ethiopia and races down the desert in thundering torrents, while the White Nile is calmer. It begins deep in Central Africa and flows northward through swamps. The two rivers meet at what is today the city of Khartoum in the present-day country of the Sudan. There, the Nile begins its journey through desert lands to the Mediterranean Sea. The Nile through ancient Nubia. From Khartoum northward, the Nile makes two huge bends forming an S shape. The northern part of the S shape finishes at the city of Aswan in Egypt. Along this 1,000-mile stretch of the Nile was a land called Nubia. The Nubian section of the Nile contains 6 rock-filled rapids called cataracts. Between the first and second cataract was Lower Nubia. In this region, the desert and granite mountains line the riverbanks, leaving very little farmland. So this is Lower Nubia. Because it rarely rained in Lower Nubia, people had to live close to the Nile for their water supply. Farther south, between the second and the sixth cataract, lies the area that was known as Upper Nubia. In this region, rain does fall, so people could farm in the summer and fall. But the farmland was a very narrow strip, no more than 2 miles wide on each side of the river. The Nile River through ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptian section of the Nile ran for about 700 miles, from the first cataract at Aswan to the Mediterranean Sea. On its way, it passed through a narrow region called Upper Egypt. This fertile strip had an average width of around 6 miles on each side of the river. In the north, the Nile spread out to form a fertile, marshy area called Lower Egypt. Dry deserts stretched on each side of the river's green banks. At the end of the Nile in the north, the river spilt into several streams that flowed into the Mediterranean Sea. These streams formed an area shaped like a triangle called the Delta. The Delta contained very fertile farmland. The gifts of the Nile. Every spring, far away in the highlands of Africa, waters came rushing down from the highlands. As they flowed, they brought rich, fertile soil called silt. Each spring, the Nile spilled over its banks. It flooded the dry land and deposited a layer of thick silt that was ideal for farming. In gratitude, the Egyptians praised Hapi, the god of the Nile.
Hail to you, O Nile, who flows from the earth and comes to keep Egypt alive.
Black land and red land. The ancient Egyptians called their land Kemet, the black land, because of the dark soil left by the Nile's floods. The timing of the floods and the height of the floodwaters might vary from year to year, but unlike the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians usually did not have to worry about flash floods. Dry years were rare, but they could cause famine. Beyond the fertile riverbanks lay the Red Land. The Red Land was vast desert. It spread out on either side of the river. Most of the Sahara lay to the west, and the part of the Sahara called the Eastern Desert lay to the east. These lands were not friendly to human life. They were useless for farming. Only those who knew the deserts very well dared travel over this blistering hot land. Yet the hostile deserts were a blessing to the Egyptians and Nubians. The hot sands shielded Egypt and Nubia from foreign attacks. This was a protection Mesopotamia did not have. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers was wide open to the raids of outsiders. The people of Mesopotamia were constantly facing invasions. Over a period of 2,000 years, the people of ancient Egypt and Nubia faced few invasions, yet they were not isolated. The Nile Valley provided a path for trade with Central Africa. The Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea provided access to Southwest Asia. Civilizations along the Nile. Communities appeared in the Nile Delta of Lower Egypt by around 4000 BC. The people of the Delta built villages around the fertile riverbeds. Their homes were built of straw or of bricks made from a mix of mud and straw. To the south, in Upper Egypt, people built scattered farming villages along the banks of the Nile. The first Nubian communities emerged around 3800 BC. Because farming was difficult, Nubians also fished in the Nile and hunted ducks and other birds along its banks. The growth of trade. The Nile was a highway for trade. Ships could float downriver because the Nile flowed north, but they could also sail upriver because the winds blew toward the south. Another trade link ran east across the desert and the Red Sea to Mesopotamia. Caravans loaded with gold, silver, copper, and fine pottery traveled the overland trade routes. Valuable goods such as cedar from the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea and gold from Nubia were sold in the bazaars of Egypt's towns. Because of the cataracts, people could not travel through Nubia by river. Instead, the Nubians developed trade routes over land. One of these routes was through the Nile Valley. The Nubians became famous traders of the ancient world as they carried goods from Central Africa and Nubia into Egypt and southwestern Asia and back. One Nubian caravan into Egypt had 300 donkeys. They carried ebony wood, ivory from elephant tusks, ostrich feathers, and eggs and panther skins. Another popular item was a throw stick, which was an African version of a boomerang. Now that we've finished the section, make sure to complete your notes, that is your homework, through the Google Classroom, and also be able to answer a few questions. 1. How did the Nile River affect the lives of the early Egyptians and Nubians? 2. How did trade develop in various places along the Nile? Finally, if the Nile River did not flood regularly, how might life along the Nile have been different? Be able to answer these, and once again have your homework through the Google Classroom, your notes submitted, and we'll see you in class tomorrow.